All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. For the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and get things started. The meeting is being recorded, as you've just been notified, but thank you all for being here. I'm so excited about this work group, particularly after reviewing some of the comments and needs that were expressed. I wanted to be sure that we were able to do this before summer was out. So our focus for this housing security work group is on advancing solutions and the resources for student housing security. And our agenda, our welcome, our meeting objectives, our review of the previous meeting and the goals that have been that we've met progress on and how we're moving forward on that. And then the Kentucky Housing Programs and Support presentation. We have Mr. Curtis Stauffer here with us to do that presentation, and I'm very excited about that. Because then we're going to take that information and what we have gathered, as well as the information that we've discussed and shared about our individual campuses and programs that we're aware of within the communities, to begin to develop out the housing security toolkit and how myself and Olivia can, use that information and have something pretty solid that we can all pull from and use. Again, this will be posted up to the Impact Exchange so that we all can have a part in engaging, and also be I'll have a good representation of what all of our campuses need. Okay. So our mission is building capacity of higher education partners to accelerate progress on student success. And our vision is we bring people together to support one another, share new ideas, scale what's working, and inspire a culture of continuous improvement. So the work group number one recap and key takeaways was understanding housing insecurity and assessing housing needs. We looked at how do we support students that have exhausted their resources on campus. The next was navigating the housing market, accessing financial assistance. And some of the things that came up in discussion were the concerns for no on-campus housing, no emergency housing, lack of public income-based housing, and high rent costs in a lot of the areas where our students are residing. Next, it was legal rights and protections and building community support. So this topic came up as a legal resources roundtable, just some information that would be provided to students led by professionals in person or remote option. It was said that that could be really beneficial to students. Transportation being provided to areas where there were housing security challenges. A lot of students move off of campus and they can't get back and forth. And so they also looked at transportation leading to some of our issues and concerns. And then the next was housing intervention and emergency support, as well as sustainable housing practices. So working with development and advancement offices for funding and donations and drives for emergency funding for the campus, emergency funds as they relate to housing security and maintaining housing for our students. And I want to, again, I had mentioned briefly, but I want to introduce Mr. Curtis Stauffer, who is with Kentucky Housing Corporation. And Mr. Curtis so graciously accepted the invite to provide this presentation today. That it was expressed certainly needed by a lot of folks in our initial session that was held at the end of the spring semester, that there was just a lack of information. So we're very excited to be able to have you here today to present to us and bridge the gap in a lot of the lack of information that we have on this area. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'll stop sharing.
Thank you very much for having me here today. And what I'm going to do today is provide, share my screen. There we go, I think. I'll be sharing an overview of KHE's programs. And so this is going to be all of our program areas, which goes beyond just serving the young adults you guys are primarily working with. But I'll give you a sense of the resources that are available, but also I'm going to open up with a bit of data, hopefully reinforcing something you guys are already aware of, based on the previous comments about the housing supply shortages really impacting the ability of folks to remain stably housed throughout the Commonwealth. So as mentioned, make my slide change. I'm Curtis Stauffer, Managing Director of Housing Contract Administration for KHC. When you translate that from bureaucracy, I oversee a team that has two divisions, one of which provides grants to community-based organizations providing homeless services around the balance of the state of Kentucky. So that's 118 of 120 counties. And the other half of my team works on single-family homebuyer development and repair programs, including supporting the efforts of community action agencies and other nonprofit partners to provide weatherization services. So just a sense of KHC and what we are and what we do. We are the State Housing Finance Agency, and we are sort of state government. We're a quasi-governmental organization governed by an independent board of directors that has statutory and gubernatorially appointed members. And our mission is to invest in quality, affordable housing solutions for families and communities across Kentucky. And we do this in a number of ways. And we receive no direct appropriations from the legislature for our work, with the exception of some recent Rural Housing Trust Fund dollars appropriated in the last two budget cycles. So we work in a number of areas. For home buyers and homeowners, we provide mortgages, which we finance through mortgage brokers serving folks throughout the state. And that includes down payment assistance. We have a foreclosure prevention program. We also have home building and home repair programs and weatherization programs that are administered by my team. On the rental housing side of things, we subsidize affordable rental housing development and preservation of existing affordable rental units. We also provide rental assistance and act as the public housing authority for 87 counties, provide specialized housing vouchers and serve the entire Commonwealth. And then we also provide homelessness programs that include funding for shelter, rapid rehousing of folks experiencing homelessness, street outreach, and eviction prevention. And we use a number of resources to get this job done, this work done, from both the private sector, federal, and state sources. And that includes from the state, the Kentucky Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which is funded via a fee on real estate transactions that the county clerks collect. We have the new Kentucky Rural Housing Trust Fund, which received its second allocation this year during legislative session, and that is targeting rural areas, particularly the first round of funding, those that were impacted by natural disasters in the last few years. We get federal low-income housing tax credits and use that same authority to do tax-exempt bonds for multifamily development. We generate revenue by selling mortgages we originate to Fannie Mae and Ginnie Mae, which are the federal mortgage entities. We act as a responsible entity for a number of HUD programs serving the Commonwealth of Kentucky, including home investment partnerships, housing opportunities for persons with AIDS, emergency solutions grants, and continuing care funding. We got a ton of Treasury COVID relief money out the door via the Healthy at Home Eviction Relief Program, our Kentucky Eviction Diversion Program, and the continued availability of the Kentucky Homeowner Assistance Fund. We also work with the U.S. Department of Energy and the state long-term housing assistance, low-income home energy assistance program funds to provide weatherization services throughout the state. So where we do it, statewide, so that's everywhere in Kentucky, we work with home buyers to provide mortgages, down payment assistance, and we fund home buyer new construction and or acquisition rehab resale programs. We offer foreclosure prevention, homeowner repair and weatherization programs to homeowners. And for support renter activities, we support rental housing development and rehabilitation and provide Section 8 project-based rental assistance. And that's where that assistance is tied to a specific unit, is not tied to a tenant. In the balance estate, we are, as mentioned, we are the public housing authority for 87 counties where we provide housing choice vouchers, also known as Section 8. We also have a number of specialized vouchers serving special populations that we provide in the balance estate, which is 118 of 120 counties, so everywhere about Louisville and Lexington. Our homeless programs serve the entire balance estate, doing emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, street outreach, and eviction prevention. We are also the recipients for the Housing for Persons with AIDS program, or HOPWA, which provides can provide rental assistance, mortgage assistance, housing search and placement assistance, and supportive services for household for a member who's been diagnosed with AIDS or HIV. And we also operate the Kentucky Eviction Diversion Program, which provides emergency rental assistance to folks who have active eviction cases in the court system. Before we dive into more of our program activities, I want to talk a little bit about the need for housing. Just this year, we have released phase 1 of the Kentucky Housing Supply Gap Analysis. And if you want to get in the weeds on this research, you can go to this address posted right here and download the phase 1 report by following this link. And we released phase 1 in April, and we will be releasing phase 2 later in August, which will provide a 5-year projection of the housing supply gap going forward. So why did we commission a housing supply gap analysis? We've been having a hard time serving low and moderate income folks because we don't have enough housing units throughout the state. We find that moderate income homebuyers can't find affordable homes, even if they've been approved for mortgages. Very low income tenants with rental assistance are having a real hard time finding units eligible to use that assistance if they have a housing choice voucher or other rental subsidies. We are seeing, after years of decreasing, an increase in homelessness across the Commonwealth. And we find that we're seeing increased competition for available units across a much broader slate of income categories because we don't have enough units available. And we've been hearing the same message from our partners around the state, those nonprofits working in communities, as well as local governments and other local power brokers, stating that they are really seeing a need for more housing throughout the Commonwealth. So I'll provide a quick overview of what our housing supply gap analysis showed. Overall, we found a shortage of 206,207 units, split roughly equally between rental and home ownership gaps. You can see that for the rental gaps, the greatest need is for our lowest income Kentuckians who are below 30% of area median income. So that's going to be your folks who are living on SSI or Social Security payments and have limited fixed incomes in most circumstances. But you'll see that the need is spread across all income categories. One thing that surprised me a little bit, which focuses largely on the fact we have not been building enough units, is that the need for sale units for home ownership is pretty evenly distributed across income categories, including, as you'll see, some of the greatest need with our folks who are the most well off. It just shows again that we have a much too small housing supply in the Commonwealth to meet the demand. So as I mentioned, you'll see the greatest shortfall in the rental side is for our lowest income friends, but we have this even distribution amongst the home buyer need. And this shows you the overall housing gap, so combined rental and homeownership units by county. And as you might guess, this particular map aligns pretty well with the population of the state, as we find this is a need across the state overall. But to give you a better sense of what it looks like from a local level, if we look at the overall housing gap to the total housing unit ratios, you'll see we see some shifts where we see some of our more rural areas experiencing pretty intensive housing gaps in their communities as well, even if they might have very small populations. And you'll see that these patterns are fairly well repeated for both rental housing and home ownership. And you'll see we have a pretty intense need in the sort of central Kentucky region for rental units, as well as northern Kentucky. But we're seeing a broader distribution of home ownership needs around the state, with that central Kentucky region showing less demand. So if you want to nerd out and dive deep into the data, we have interactive maps available on our website, as well as data available in the full phase 1 report, which you can download following this link. And you can get county by county data on all these data points. And here's links where you can review webinars related to the housing supply gap analysis, download the full report, and access the raw data if you wish to use it in your own research or analysis. If you really want to geek out, you can join us for the Kentucky Affordable Housing Conference in August in Louisville, where we'll officially release phase 2 of the housing supply gap analysis on Wednesday, October 21st. And you can follow this link to learn more about the conference and to register if interested. But the big thing I want you to take away from this presentation of data is that our housing supply shortage is our most urgent housing issue. Every single one of our counties has a housing gap. And if we were able to fill that gap, we would see huge returns on that investment. We'd have lower average housing costs because there'd be less demand on a closed market. We'd see higher homeownership rates. We'd see more workforce housing to support the great economic investments we're seeing in many of our communities around the state in recent years. We'd see much lower eviction rates. We see a great reduction in homelessness and overall increased household stability for people of all incomes. And one thing, phrase that we've stolen from Greg Colburn, who's the author of a great book called Homelessness is a Housing Problem. So if you want to dive into that, I'd highly recommend that as well. But one thing he says that really emphasizes the important role housing plays in the economic health of the Commonwealth and our country is homes are where jobs go to sleep at night. And far too often we see politicians highlighting economic development as their key impetus and priority. But too often we fail to realize that when you bring more jobs to a community, you have to have more housing so the folks who are filling those jobs have a place to live. And too often that housing need is not highlighted when we talk about growth in jobs and job opportunities posed by recent and significant investments in many of our communities. Now I'm going to dive in a little bit and talk about homelessness, both as it's experienced in the Commonwealth and some concepts from best practices nationwide, as well as a little bit of information about how we respond to homelessness in the balance of state of Kentucky. So too often we find that we are blaming folks experiencing homelessness for their homelessness, and it's their fault. It fails to recognize the systemic issues that are in play, including that significant housing supply gap that contribute to homelessness. So some of the myths we commonly hear is, oh, you know, these folks are just junkies that are getting high and they need to achieve sobriety before they get to be in housing and deserve housing. And that people that are experiencing mental health issues need to be highly medicated and fully compliant with treatment programs before they can receive housing assistance. People need to be housing ready before you let them get into housing, or they need to be put into transitional housing programs before getting permanently housed. That chronically homeless people are choosing to be homeless. That people need to hit rock bottom to experience the worst that life can offer before they are ready to be rehoused and rebuild their lives. And that shelters need to be very didactic in their programming and high in requirements to serve folks before letting them move on to a housing solution. And really that too often we see people trying to view homeless services as a way to control the behaviors of persons experiencing homelessness rather than serve those folks to help them end their homelessness and achieve more stability in their lives. Click one, seem to have deleted a slide. One thing that we see is about 80% of folks who are experiencing homelessness fall into a category where it's sort of a one-time occurrence, typically caused due to a life experience, particularly related to an economic shortfall or a health issue or things along those lines. And folks are able to resolve their homelessness with a little bit of assistance or none at all by utilizing resources they have at hand from friends, family, and other means of support. But for the other portion of the population, we see about 10% of folks who are intermittently homeless over the years, experiencing multiple episodes of homelessness, and those that are chronically homeless and have been homeless continuously for a year at a time, sometimes for many, many, many years. So obviously for these folks who are not being adequately served by the system in place, the system ain't working. And as you've seen, we have a significant housing shortfall, which is being exacerbated by economic and population growth in many of our communities. And this basically turns the search for housing into a game of musical chairs. And if you have any of these contributing causes, it makes your ability to play that game of musical chairs a little bit harder. So folks who are experiencing substance use disorder, have mental illness, or have a history of eviction or job loss, or have experienced a change in their household composition, or undergoing significant health crises, those folks are not going to be able to hop on that chair when the music stops to have access to the limited supply of housing. So that's just something to remember, that we're talking about housing is the solution to homelessness, but if we don't have enough of it, it's increasingly difficult to solve. Here's what I was saying before about the transitionally homeless. I got my slides out of order on this, but this is the vast majority of people who enter the homeless system. And this is those for whom emergency shelters are a useful and quick acting resource. And again, we have episodically homeless and chronically homeless folks who are engaged in the system or excluded from the system overall, and are much more difficult to serve and have not been adequately served by the homeless response system overall. So I'm talking about some trends in homelessness in Kentucky. As I mentioned earlier, we are seeing an increase in recent years, caused partially by the pandemic, but I'd say more so by an increased lack of affordable housing for those low-income folks in the Commonwealth. So you'll see, in looking at the past few years, we were seeing a decrease, and this was a trend that, if you were to look even further back, that has been continuing for a number of years up until the pandemic, where we were seeing a decrease in homelessness because we've been much more aggressive and thoughtful about how we're investing limited homelessness resources dollars. You'll see this bump in 2021. That is because the point in time count, or the one day every year, we count folks who are experiencing homelessness who are living in shelters or on the street or in transitional housing. We did not do a street count that year due to the pandemic and having to keep folks in social isolation, and depended only on those folks reported as being in homeless shelters and or transitional housing. But once we were able to count again, you see we've had a significant increase post-pandemic. And again, this is despite the fact we saw significant resources invested during the pandemic to help provide additional homelessness and housing resources, both from the U.S. Treasury and the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. So despite those investments, which in many ways were highly successful, we're seeing an increase in homelessness. And you'll see these trends are mirrored in each of the three continuum of care serving the state. Again, we've got Lexington, Louisville, each have their own continuum of care, which is the governing body for homeless services. And then we have our balance of state figures there as well. And this is particularly troubling to me, that we've seen a huge bump in persons experiencing unsheltered homelessness. So that means folks are sleeping outside on the street or in other places unfit for human habitation, be it in their car or in a barn or some other shelter that's not really intended to be a permanent home. So here's what we talk about what ending homelessness looks like. So a functional end to homelessness means we have nobody is going to remain homeless for more than 30 days before moving directly into a permanent housing solution. This is the goal of our homelessness programs. And this is hard work. It means that our homeless shelters are working as a process, and they are not a destination. That we have homelessness diversion as an intentional service, trying to help folks stay housed before they become homeless. And that our interventions and conversations with persons experiencing homelessness are housing focused, because that is the goal, is to end folks' homelessness and get them rehoused. And we want to ensure quick access to permanent housing resources. So that means getting folks housed within less than 60 days of them entering the system. And we use a by name registry of people to be served that I'll discuss in more detail later, which is called a coordinated entry process, whereby we highlight the folks most at risk of dying by being on the streets to get housing first. So again, at KHC, we serve as the administering entity for the Balance of State Continuum of Care, or the KYBOS-COC. As I mentioned before, there are three continuum of care in Kentucky: Lexington, Fayette County, administered by the Lexington Office of Homelessness Prevention and Intervention. Louisville, Jefferson County, COC, which is administered by the Coalition for the Homeless in Louisville, and the balance of state, administered by KHC. So what is a community of care? It's a comprehensive geographic system and planning body dedicated to ending homelessness, and it consists of HUD-funded and non-HUD-funded key stakeholders that work to address homelessness by providing a continuum of housing programs and services, and try to respond best to local need. And again, KHC is the BOS-COC lead. So we have 120 counties. We have a network of providers and stakeholders throughout the state that are both funded and unfunded. And we serve as both the governing and the planning body for homeless services in the Commonwealth. And we have a very simple goal. We want to create a homeless response system whereby homelessness is rare, brief, and non-recurring in the Commonwealth. And to achieve this, we have a number of interventions. There's homelessness prevention investments. We use street outreach to identify persons experiencing unsheltered homelessness, supportive services to help folks resolve their homelessness and or maintain in the housing resources they've been provided. We use emergency shelter to engage folks and provide a safe place to stay while they seek permanent housing interventions. We have rapid rehousing programs which provide short and medium-term assistance to get folks quickly out of shelter and into units on the private market. And that can take both immediate short, being 1 to 3 months in terms of assistance, all the way up to about 24 months as medium-term rental assistance. And then we have permanent supportive housing programs, which serve those folks with the greatest service needs on a permanent basis. And to track how we do this, all funded activities have to enter data into what's called the Homelessness Management Information System, or HMIS. And KHC administers the HMIS for the entirety of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So we partner with Lexington and Louisville on that effort. So for about 15 years or so, federal programs have been required to operate from a housing first perspective. So this is a big change. Again, moving back from some of those prior myths about you have to be housing ready before you can get into housing if you're experiencing homelessness. What this housing first orientation means is that we remove all programmatic barriers to program entry, such as requiring behavioral health or substance use to be addressed prior to housing or requiring income prior to housing. We do not mandate participation in services prior to obtaining housing or as a condition of housing assistance. And this is really framed by the belief that's been backed up by science that getting folks into housing provides them a needed stability that they can then use to address the other issues which may have contributed to their homelessness. And again, we want to emphasize that a homeless shelter is the first point of entry for the homelessness response system. It is not a destination. And we use shelters as a way to help identify folks experiencing homelessness and link them to available housing resources in their area. And housing first is way cheaper than the old way of doing things. If you think about it, if a person experiencing homelessness is engaging with a number of different other systems, such as criminal justice or emergency rooms or other immediate emergency social services that are highly expensive, if you compare the costs of what somebody who is a frequent user of these systems who is unhoused to once they become housed, you can see that the investment in housing and providing services they need to stay in that housing is far, far cheaper for the country and our local governments on the whole than letting people bounce around between systems that have very expensive response activities. Another thing that we emphasize and mandate for folks that receive funds for emergency shelter in the balance of state is they have to be low barrier. And so this is a key portion of the housing first approach. So again, there's no unnecessary requirements for who can access shelter. So you can't have blanket criminal background checks, require people to be income, or require that they be actively sober. Although you'll find that folks do provide limits on use of substances whilst in shelter. And we don't have mandated participation for shelter programmatic activities. But this doesn't mean it's a no barrier shelter. So for example, shelters that serve houseless children will screen for sex offenders, or there'll be other standards that folks may have about folks with a history of violent behavior, or folks bringing weapons into the facility, or things along those lines. But we really emphasize that our shelters work to screen people in the shelter and not exclude them from it. And this means that our low barrier shelter works to keep a person in the shelter while we're working to identify a permanent housing solution for that person, and not so setting up so many rules that many people simply prefer to return to being unsheltered. And if you're curious about more detail on low barrier shelter, there's a link from the National Alliance on Homelessness. It provides a lovely summary of low barrier shelter best practices. But that being said, we still find that folks, depending on their circumstances, may not want to enter shelter due to a number of reasons. They have a pet they want to remain with them. They wish to continue cohabitating with a same-sex or opposite-sex partner. They may wish to find a place where they can store their belongings on a long-term basis. So you'll find that is some of the reasons why folks choose to remain unhoused, particularly if they're living in an encampment or other more, for lack of a better term, stable unhoused situation. So we'll talk about housing interventions for homelessness. Rapid rehousing targets those experiencing literal homelessness and can provide deposit assistance, ongoing rental assistance for up to 24 months. And these interventions that I'm describing are guided by HUD regulations. So I'm basically describing what HUD mandates for them. And this is designed to get folks rapidly stabilized in housing and to prevent a return to homelessness. Rapid rehousing gives our partners that provide it a great deal of flexibility in how they choose to design what will be provided to the person they're working to serve. And we strive to ensure that our partners use customized housing plans and interventions for folks based on their service needs and housing needs, with a goal of ensuring they can maintain long-term and permanent housing stability when the rapid rehousing assistance ends. Permanent supportive housing is another very important resource, and it serves those persons that have been experiencing chronic homelessness, which means they've been literally homelessness and have a documented disability for at least 12 months consecutively or cumulatively. And this combines ongoing affordable housing assistance with voluntary, and that's the key word on that, intensive support services that helps folks address their needs and ensure that they can stay in housing and improve their lives in a number of different ways. This is the most costly federal program to dedicated to end homelessness. But as I mentioned, despite this cost, it is much, much cheaper to serve folks with PSH rather than allowing them to remain unhoused and engage with a number of systems with much more expensive interventions. And what we do is prioritize those who are most likely to literally die on the streets for this intervention because the resources are so limited. And again, we mandate that this program is low barrier. And these units tend to be, for the vast majority of the folks served in Kentucky at present, tenant-based vouchers. So tenants will work to identify landlords in the private market that'll serve them, and their housing provider will continue to provide those ongoing social supports. And these are long-term and ongoing. The only limitation we find for these PSH subsidies is if Congress fails to pass adequate funding for HUD in the annual appropriations process. So a quick summary about the differences between rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing. We have a couple different funding streams. We can do RRH, whereas PSH is only for continuum of care funds. And you'll see that we have very similar requirements as far as low barrier and homelessness status, although more chronically homelessness folks are prioritized for PSH, and that the PSH support is indefinite and is not time capped. Another intervention we have at KHC that we provide via community-based organizations is home tenant-based rental assistance, which can provide up to 24 months of ongoing rental subsidy and utility assistance based on client income, serving folks who are at or below 60% of area median income. And there is no requirement for these funds to serve folks experiencing homelessness, although many of the people we fund to provide this program do prioritize folks experiencing homelessness for assistance. And this program does not fund services, but some organizations that use these funds will pair other funding with it to provide supportive services to their home tenant-based rental assistance clients. And we do all this work in the balance of state with federal funds, utilizing emergency solutions grants, again, which can fund emergency shelter, street outreach, supportive services, and administrative costs. And we only get about $2.5 million annually, and that's to cover shelter and rapid rehousing programs primarily, with a little bit of street outreach across the entire 118 county balance of state. Continuing care funding is a little bit different than ESG in that it is a competitive program. So every continuum of care organization nationwide competes for funding annually via an application administered by HUD. And we've been pretty successful in the balance of state of Kentucky and got 14.2, actually, let me think about that. We just had a recent award announced. It's worth $15.3 million for annual funding for this. And again, it works to provide a community-wide commitment to ending homelessness and supports efforts that try to address those most at risk. Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS is another formula fund that we get approximately $1 million to serve folks in the balance of state. And the home tenant-based rental assistance allocation is based on KHC's appropriations for that activity from our annual appropriation from HUD of this year, which is about $14 million. So every year we look at about $20 million, give or take, to serve 118 counties providing homeless services. Amongst the many investments that came through the pandemic was a recent HUD special NOFO targeting unsheltered and rural homelessness. And we were very pleased to find we had several projects funded under both the rural and unsheltered awards, providing 3-year grants to expand permanent supportive housing, street outreach, and supportive service activities. And we are really pleased to say we've built what we call a housing connector team at KHC, and that works with folks who have received specialized housing choice vouchers through our PHA side of the corporation to help folks identify units to occupy, as well as complete necessary paperwork to utilize their voucher. So we got funding to enable us to serve folks in the 99 county rural area of the 118 county balance of state on an ongoing basis, utilizing those funds for that housing navigation services. So how do we identify who gets served and how they get served for the limited resources we have to provide housing interventions for persons experiencing homelessness? And that is the coordinated entry system. And so this coordinated entry system, which is mandated by HUD, moved us away from a first come, first serve operating procedure for housing interventions for persons experiencing homelessness to a system that prioritizes people based on need. And it is a universal process that coordinates program participant intake, assessment, and provision of referrals for housing. It needs to cover the entire geographic area served and be easily accessed through multiple entry points by persons experiencing homelessness. And it utilizes a standardized triage tool to assess folks based on need for prioritization for housing. HUD mandates that the CE process be implemented regardless of the geography, housing stock, availability of services, or any unique community characteristics, because this principle can be applied nationwide regardless of circumstance. But it ain't easy work. So the biggest analogy for coordinated entry system is it operates a lot like an ER, but it's an ER for housing. So say, for example, and this is a pretty rough analogy, but you were playing softball with your friends and you broke your arm sliding into home plate. Hurts a lot. You gotta get that bone set. So you go to the emergency room, you're hanging out. Just about to be your turn to be served, and somebody comes in with a gunshot wound to the head. Who do you think they're gonna serve first? You or the person with a gunshot wound? This is the same idea we have with a coordinated entry system. Those folks who might need lighter touch interventions or are least at risk of dying on the streets due to their homelessness are not going to be prioritized for the limited availability of housing, particularly for our permanent supportive housing resources. So what the coordinated entry system does is assess each individual's need and prioritizes those who are most at risk for the housing interventions that are available. So what do we try to do with the coordinated entry system? First, if we can, we encourage our partners who are acting as the front door of the system to divert folks away from the system and help them identify resources so they can solve their own homelessness. And if that can't be achieved, you want to quickly get folks off the street and into permanent housing. And we really do think of emergency shelters as providing this sort of emergency room for folks experiencing homelessness to try to link them into housing. And this effort really should focus the work of our shelter providers about getting folks housed and hopefully create a more streamlined and easy and less stressful process, because we have a system in place that will ensure folks are treated equitably and fairly as they try to reach out and get housed. And it also works to identify the most appropriate housing resource, if available, for folks based on their need. And again, we are looking to implement this as an individual, as a system, community-wide program, rather than leaving it up to each individual program that's funded to decide who they want to serve. So how does it work in the balance of state? We utilize the area development district geographies to have local prioritization communities where our providers get together to talk about who they've assessed and what housing resources are available within that geography. So everybody, every region has what we call an LPC lead agency. So that is a homeless services provider that's been designated to lead coordinated entry efforts in their communities. And the LPC lead coordinates triage and access support and entry. And that does not mean that if you've been assessed by the coordinated entry system, does not mean you'll be referred for housing. The referral comes after assessment. And regardless of the availability of the federally funded resources, the LPC lead and the homeless service provider is engaging with that person experiencing homelessness is going to work to try to find a housing solution for them within or without the system. So again, here's a map of each district. So what do you do if you identify somebody who's experiencing homelessness? If you are in balance of state, contact the local prioritization community lead agency in your region. If you're in Lexington, contact the Office of Homelessness Prevention and Intervention. And in Louisville, contact the Coalition for the Homeless. And there's links to their websites on these slides that will be provided. And here is a list of each region's lead agency contact. So if you've identified somebody experiencing homelessness, please contact the person identified on this roster. And just to make it clear, housing is the solution to homelessness. Anybody says anything otherwise, they are not telling you the truth. And as we saw in the housing gap analysis, we need more housing units on the rental market, especially that are affordable to the poorest Kentuckians. Particularly, we also need more permanent supportive housing resources to serve those with the greatest needs who are most at risk of dying in our streets. So after discussing our homelessness programs, I'll quickly go over to our single family programs. We operate all these programs by funding community-based agencies to provide these services. We have single family homebuyer development, and we offer home repair programs funded via the State Affordable Housing Trust Fund and Rural Housing Trust Fund and the Weatherization Assistance Program. Here you'll find a summary of our single family homebuyer development programs. Depends on the funding source being used, but we use home investment partnerships from the feds, as well as those two state resources, AHDF and Rural Housing Trust Fund. Home can serve folks at 80% area median income or less. AHDF is 60% of area median income or less, and RHDF is up to 120% of area median income or less. And folks need to have limited assets to be eligible for the program. We fund single-family detached homes, qualified manufactured homes, and homes must be the homebuyer's primary residence. We also fund townhome units provided that the developer seeks a waiver from the single-family detached requirement. As of right now, what we have as max assistance amounts, in addition to funding construction, we will also provide subsidies for the home buyer, so that home buyer subsidy is the difference between what the home buyer can afford in a mortgage and the sale price of the unit, which we mandate to be at appraised value for the region or for the neighborhood. And we also can have a development gap. So that means that it costs the developer more to build the unit than they can sell it for at appraised value. So the combined development gap and direct homebuyer subsidy limits for HDF and home is $95,000. And for the Rural Housing Trust Fund, the combined subsidies cannot exceed $120,000. For the most part, we see our partners limit homebuyer subsidies to around $40,000, though we have seen that go up quite a bit given recent rises in interest rates. Again, we fund both new construction to create units for sale to homebuyers, as well as acquisition, rehabilitation, and resale of existing units to homebuyers. Developers that can apply are private developers, nonprofit organizations, particularly those that have designation from us as community housing development organizations, faith-based and community service organizations, units of local government, regional or statewide housing system organizations, and housing authorities can apply for assistance. And again, as I mentioned, all these programs can provide up to 100% of construction financing. But any financing, unless an organization is designated as a community housing development organization, they must return the difference between the sales price and the combined subsidy if it is not completely utilized. We release funding applications annually in November and typically announce the awards to our community-based partners every year in the spring. And this is just a quick overview of some of the work we funded. This is a small subdivision in Perry County called Gurney's Bend, which is down in Hazard, which created 15 new units utilizing a variety of funding streams for low-income home buyers, and has served folks that were impacted by the flooding disaster as well. We also have a couple of home repair programs. The AHTF program is by far the largest, as we've only had limited RHTF funding. Again, we're in our second year of funding for that, and that will depend on continued appropriations from the state legislature. But what we view this is almost a homelessness prevention program. We want to ensure that low-income home buyers' homes remain safe and habitable. So we developed what we call minimum habitability standards that we require our developer partners administering these programs to get those homes up to. So this basically just means that the home will be safe and habitable on an ongoing basis, and other eligible costs can include accessibility modifications as well. Again, we fund nonprofit agencies or local governments for these programs and do an annual award via competitive notice of funding availability. The Weatherization Assistance Program provides energy efficient rehabilitation to households with incomes at or below 200% of the poverty level. And there's a number of construction activities to increase the energy efficiency of a unit that can be incurred under this program. And we as KHC act as the administering agency, but the delivered services are provided by community action agencies in almost all communities in the Commonwealth, and a nonprofit developer in a few counties in central Kentucky. Again, another big boost in funding we've seen as a result of COVID-era investments is the bipartisan infrastructure law allocated an additional $58 million to the Commonwealth to support increasing weatherization activities over the course of the next 5 years. So this will allow us to expand the scope of the program, which to date has primarily served single-family households, to do more investment in multifamily upgrades to ensure renters have access to the decreased utility costs that the weatherization assistance program provides to its recipients. KHC also acts as a public housing authority. We have housing choice vouchers, or Section 8, which provides tenants with a voucher that will cover the difference between 30% of their income and what the rent costs, up to fair market rent established by HUDs, provided those units pass a housing quality standards inspection. And we provide housing choice vouchers as the public housing authority in 87 counties, and you'll find a link to the counties we serve on the slide. Unfortunately, there is much greater demand for these vouchers than they are available. So we operate on a waitlist basis for it, and we typically only open the waitlist for new applications for about 1 to 2 weeks per year. And our application period for this year just closed last Friday. We also administer some specialized vouchers as well. So these are all tenant-based, but they need special referrals. So the mainstream voucher serves non-elderly persons with disabilities. And at KHC, we have prioritized serving folks who have a history of homelessness, who might be leaving more time-limited homelessness housing intervention resources such as rapid rehousing, and or have lower service needs and are directly referred from homelessness. So those referrals must come from the Balanced State Continuum of Care. Similarly, emergency housing vouchers are a fairly new HUD program that were funded via COVID investments that serve folks who are experiencing or at risk of homelessness. And we have allocated those utilizing the coordinated entry system to serve folks experiencing literal homelessness. And another voucher that's very similar to that is the Stability Voucher Program, which was funded under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act to provide vouchers to folks with a history of homelessness who are experiencing it and or are at risk. And again, we require referrals for those to come through the coordinated entry system. The Family Unification Program serves two populations. One is households who are engaged in child protective services, whereby the lack of stable housing is the main reason why the family has not been reunified. Or it can serve kids who have aged out of foster care at age 18 to provide ongoing housing assistance for a short period of time, which I believe is up to 3 years for those kids aging out of foster care. But for the Family Unification Program, vouchers serving Client Protective Services affiliated households with children, those vouchers are not time limited. We also offer our project-based voucher program, and this turns the voucher program on its head a little bit. This is where we give vouchers to developers to assist with rental subsidies on the units in their buildings. So instead of subsidizing the tenant, we subsidize the unit with these. And oftentimes these vouchers are awarded during the development process. Currently, we also have emergency pandemic help available for homeowners via the Kentucky Homeowner Assistance Fund. And this can provide up to $60,000 of assistance with homeownership-related costs, including mortgage payments, homeowner association fees, insurance costs, taxes, to homeowners, provided they were economically impacted by the pandemic. And you can encourage folks to apply for that at either of these websites. I find it easier to remember Protect My Kentucky Home. ProtectMyKYHome.org is a quick address for that. And we are in no danger of running out of funding for that program. So if you know anybody who's behind on their mortgage and needs assistance, and they can document a link to a COVID economic impact, strongly encourage them to apply online. As I mentioned earlier, we also have a eviction diversion program that can serve every county outside of Lexington, or Fayette and Jefferson, whereby if somebody has an active eviction case in court, whereby they have been issued what is called a forcible detainer complaint, they are eligible to receive up to 3 months past due assistance and 1 month future rent assistance if their landlord is willing to withdraw the eviction complaint, or if the eviction complaint continues, those folks will be given a relocation voucher that'll provide security deposit and 2 months future rent to help folks get rehoused after eviction. And folks can apply online at teamkyedp.ky.gov. And unlike the Healthy at Home Eviction Relief Program, which is no longer active, landlords do not have to complete an application to receive payment. They just need to agree to participate if they are going to allow a tenant to remain in their unit and or accept an evicted tenant into a new unit. And here's some contact information for the program if needed. Another big thing we do is build multifamily units for rental using a wide array of funding sources, including low-income housing tax credits, tax-exempt bonds, National Housing Trust Fund dollars, home investment partnerships, and the 2 state programs mentioned earlier that we use for single-family development as well, Affordable Housing Trust Fund and Rural Housing Trust. And I'll just have a couple pictures of recent developments that we've funded, ranging from quite large to smaller. Here is a Northern Kentucky project, senior development. Here's a duplex in Owsley County, created by one of our community housing development organizations, which shows that we can do both things on a large scale and a small scale, although it's much more difficult, ironically, to get smaller scale projects funded because funding streams like low-income housing tax credits work much better on larger developments. Here's another senior development in Bullitt County, just with see a couple interior shots as well. So we put affordability restrictions on these assisted developments ranging from 15 to 30 years. Putting together these projects is really, really hard work. It can take years to build a good and competitive application for funding, particularly from low-income housing tax credits. And also you have to ensure that these projects can be sustainably operated for the period of affordability. So they have to have sufficient revenue from rents and other sources to ensure they can pay their ongoing expenses. Otherwise, the project will be at risk. So looking at those ongoing budgets for the duration of the affordability periods is a key part of our application process for multifamily development. And I won't dive into this, but this has some common terms that are used in the multifamily development field. And you can refer to these once these slides are provided. So low-income housing tax credits are allocated to each state based upon population. In the last competitive application, we awarded a little over $13 million in low-income housing tax credits to 14 developments. And what happens after the projects receive their LIHTC allocation, they sell those credits to investors looking for longer-term tax deferrals for up to 10 years on the private market. So typically, investors will pay between 85 and 90 cents per dollar in credit available. And the investors will typically remain as owners for 15 years, but often at 15 years, there'll be a refinancing of project to ensure ongoing affordability for another 15 years. So the vast majority of low-income housing tax credit projects end up being affordable housing for 30 years or longer. Another funding resource we have are tax-exempt bonds, utilizing a 4% low-income housing tax credit. And so we serve as the issuer of these bonds, and if developments meet application requirements, they can be funded fairly easily. However, in recent years, given the competitive nature for bond funding from other programs in the Commonwealth, including things like roads, water infrastructure, other investments that also use private activity bonds, our ability to issue these bonds has been limited in recent years. I think last year we only issued 4% bonds to 2 projects, and it used to be in earlier times, these basically were available on an as-needed basis. So we also use a lot of our other funding to fill the gap we see for low-income housing tax credit projects, because unfortunately, the low-income housing tax credit equity they can generate is not sufficient to meet the development costs of project. And it helps eliminate debt that can inhibit the ongoing sustainability of a rental unit. So we use these other funding streams you'll see listed below to fill the gap, development gap for these multifamily projects. And again, we do these awards annually, and it's a pretty lengthy application process. Applicants have to apply. They basically have to apply to be approved to apply for the program via capacity application. So we want to see the developers have a history of successfully building and managing affordable rental developments before they receive funding. And we issue this competition through what is called a qualified allocation plan. And depending on how much funding is available for a multifamily team, there may be a separate application that can support smaller scale projects that would not be appropriate for low-income housing tax credits or bond projects. And here's a link to our multifamily program pages if you wish to learn more about that. One thing too, if you are working on an advocacy level, try to encourage the creation of new rental units in your communities. There is an industry group that might be able to link you to developers that could be interested in working in your communities. That's Kentucky Affordable Housing Coalition. It primarily consists of developers, but as well as other investors, attorneys, et cetera, that support multifamily development. You can reach out to Tiffany Mothfaller, the executive director, if you wish to try to make a connection to developers interested in serving your community. So a little more about KHC. We have an e-newsletter service that we call eGrams. I'd recommend if you're interested in staying up to date on what we at KHC are doing, sign up for eGrams, and you can select general KHC information for sure, as well as more project-specific or activity-specific eGrams, such as those related to homeless programs, multifamily development, single-family development, mortgage lending, or other activities we perform. If you want to learn more about the programs that my division does, so that'll be our homeless programs and single family development programs, we have a separate website that contains a wealth of documentation related to every program we administer. Again, you can learn more about multi-program programs on our website, and the tenant assistance programs page is where you can learn more about our Section 8 program, as well as those specialized vouchers and how folks can apply. But again, we don't anticipate applications being taken for the wait list for that, probably for at least another year, although that is subject to change at any time and also dependent on what Congress chooses to appropriate for housing choice voucher funding. Here's a number of web links you can use to access some different resources, including a resources page. This is got links to a number of resources that folks in need can use beyond KHC, including this assisted rental housing directory. And this is an Excel spreadsheet you can download, sorted by county, that lists all affordable housing developments, as well as the public housing authority serving that county. We have this community resource guide. It's a little bit out of date, but it lists a number of supportive services that are available via county. Again, here's our eviction diversion program, the Homeowner Assistance Fund, which is also, again, available via protectmykyhome.org. Folks can also seek assistance, short-term assistance, depending on what their community action agency chooses to prioritize, but from their local community action agency. So this is a link to identify which community action agency serves your county. And here's a link to the directory of public housing authorities in the Commonwealth. If you're looking for contact information to reach out to PHAs beyond KHC. And here's a bunch of contact information should you have questions about any specific program. Mine you'll see up top. Kenzie Strubank runs our homeless programs team. Kelly Reynolds administers our single family development team. Terry Helton is over our multifamily programs. John Coulter runs tenant assistance. And my boss, who is master of all, is Wendy Smith, our Deputy Executive Director for Housing Programs. If you have folks who are interested in obtaining one of our mortgage loans, which can include a link to homebuyer down payment assistance, they need to be worked through an approved lender from KHC. So they'll be working through their mortgage broker or bank to access those resources. And you can find a list of approved lenders on the KHC website as well. So that is the slideshow, and I hope I didn't overwhelm you with far too much information. And if you have any questions regarding anything presented today, please feel free to reach out to me or any of the folks listed on this slide. And as I mentioned earlier, I'll provide a PDF of these slides that can be shared with the group as well. And I will stop sharing right now.
So much, Curtis. I did make some notes of a couple things, and if we need to like have a follow-up to answer some of those, and my mind is just rolling.
Sure.
Then I will do that via email or follow-up call. But I'm looking at the possibility of working with some of the community partners and finding a list of where we can send our students. And our students, as you probably could imagine, they look very different, right? But I've done some work with some students that receive services and support from Rapid Rehousing Program. And that was very, very helpful to students who just, they could not afford to live on campus. And a lot of times people think that's, that's an immediate solution. They didn't have the funding, they didn't have the ability to do that. Or, they couldn't sign back up for whatever reason. And they got assistance from that Rapid Rehousing, because if they did not, they otherwise would have gone without housing. In Lexington, that was very easy to find. We had a couple of programs, and the immediate one was Arbor Youth, who was able to do that. How could we find, or is that information available where we find the listing of individuals who have that? In some of our communities, some of our folks just don't even know where to start or where to send the students to.
Yeah, so for the balance of state, if you're looking for things such as rapid rehousing or other homelessness intervention resources, all those referrals have to go through the coordinated entry system. So if you go to the slide where you saw the regional coordinated entry lead agency, they can be a resource for you to identify the appropriate contact in the community the student is seeking assistance in. And they can answer questions related to that. Additionally, you can reach out to us as well, and we can help make referrals as well. We get lots of questions from folks around the state seeking assistance all the time.
Oh, that is great. That is great. Thank you so much. I'm sure there's more questions to come as folks are reviewing this video and being able to review notes and stuff from our work group today. But I just want to take the time to thank you again for being here with us and providing this information. We have our workshop piece now that we have to transition to. I know that there's going to be a lot more conversation coming from that. So if there are more questions, would it be okay for me to just shoot you an email from there? Oh, you're on mute. You're still muted, Curtis.
Yes, reaching out with any questions is wholly appropriate. If I can't answer it, I'll refer it to an appropriate team member. Again, if any questions arise or you have information or have somebody who might need request accessing assistance, we're happy to provide that to the best of our ability. But as mentioned, we are in a resource shortfall. So we cannot serve all the folks in need around the state, which breaks my heart that the wealthiest nation in the country has homelessness population such as we do. I mean, it's policy decision the folks in power have made over the years, not prioritize helping folks out. But I would be happy to assist any folks in resolving any questions they might have regarding our programs or where they might be able to identify any other resources.
Well, thanks again. I appreciate you being here with us this afternoon.
I'm glad to, and I'll get you guys a PDF of the slides as soon as we log off.
Great, thanks. For the rest of us that are here we'll transition to our next piece, and I will share my screen again. We won't keep you very long. We want to make sure that we have some useful information that is going to go into our housing security toolkit. And as we've discussed, the vision for that is to create a centralized hub of resources and information. We want to make sure that it is accessible and that it is meeting the needs of all students. So we want to make sure that we are working with students that is meeting their housing need across the spectrum for housing insecurity and housing security. I heard one of the things that was mentioned was the utility program, the weatherization program. A lot of students have benefited from that service because having their electric paid, their gas bill to have heat during the wintertime has allowed them to maintain their housing during those rough months here in Kentucky. So that's really important. And then looking at the holistic support of students and their overall well-being and making sure that they understand resources and that they are equipped with knowledge and information, such as where to go, how do they apply for that assistance on their own if they need rental assistance, or if they've gotten to the point that they are in an area that has some funding available for their home buying program that in some places may be actually more affordable than rent. Because it is such a small group, we will not go into a breakout. So Olivia, what do you think about just pulling up the Miro board and taking about 20 minutes to gather some information and ideas from this group, and then we'll just send out requests to the larger group to get some information added in on the impact exchange.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay, so I'm gonna drop the link to the Miro board in the chat, and I can also share my screen. I can also add notes. You all can add notes as you see fit. I don't want it to look like I'm just trying to like steamroll here. So as I like ask the questions, feel free to like jump in and add. Let me share my screen. Can you all see that okay? Yeah. Okay, thanks. So I guess like we were gonna do like breakout groups, but since like it's like a small group, we're gonna do just like large group. So our first like area of focus is how can we help identify students that are housing secure, like what resources do you all use to help identify students? Is that like a screening process, check-in appointments? Like, we're just kind of curious to see like what works on your campuses as far as identifying housing security.
I know on some of the past groups, there was some information noted. It included students who were questioning or requesting year-round housing. So I think reviewing applications for year-round housing requests,
Mm.
definitely a big one.
And also I can add the question too, is like, what could be useful to know like in the toolkit of how to identify students? Like, for example, like an outline on how to build a survey out, or how to communicate to students to get their attention about available resources. Like, would that be helpful for you all?
I want to speak for folks on the group, I'll let them chip in, but I think it's good.
Okay. I guess our next question can move on to available housing support programs that your campus offers. So the toolkit, like the goal of the toolkit is to help communicate to other campus partners different resources that campuses are offering for housing insecurity. So they can kind of also use that ideal to start their own programs possibly. So if you all have like innovative programs or resources, like please feel free to share them in the chat or out loud. I see someone on the Miro. Yeah. Maggie, I see.
Can you ask the question one more time? I'm sorry. What did you want us to do?
Yeah. I was just asking like what are available housing support programs for students that your campus offers, like, or community within the community. We're just kind of trying to identify those support systems.
We do have a lot of students that come in needing support, and I feel like most of the time, we're talking to them about maybe like the Arbor House. So you all mentioned the Kentucky Housing Corporation. What's the other one? Heck, I have to get my resource binder out, but I feel like most of them, the process is so long and you have people with such immediate needs. I feel like I end up not really being as resourceful as I wish that I could have been, maybe. What is the name of that darn? I can't think of what the other one is. And we have a lot of people that are actually live in shelters.
We're in a rural area. We have a really hard time finding placement for students. So I don't know that I'm much help there, but sorry, I've not used Miro, so it took me a second to figure out how to do the tabs. But like we use our KC2CS Student Success Barrier Survey, and we pull that each week and share the results or the responses with people on campus that we feel can help our students be connected to resources.
Yeah, I got that noted. And I didn't really ask this question before getting started, but do you all have any thoughts about the presentation from Kentucky Housing that you want to share? Like any did it spark any other questions or concerns about housing insecurity? Because I was definitely thinking about like 10 million things as he was going through it. But if you have any thoughts on the presentation, please feel free to share that as well.
Because it was like information overload, and I know he's used to presenting to a different type of group, and I was asking him to do an overview of programs and stuff available. But one of the things that I did hear, and I heard a couple of different times, so if I could think in my wildest dreams of what I would like to do concerning housing and any type of partnership is, first of all, we have many campuses that currently work with Family Scholar House. And I know they have their own housing programs. So I think it would be absolutely amazing if they could have someone something. I'm saying this and they're gonna be like, thanks, Ariane. But other partnerships, they may be able to do the same. So we have the Family Scholar Program, and then we have the One Parent Scholar House that is in Lexington. That's a very similar program, but it's just that one entity there. Where they can provide that type of support and assistance. And like One Parent Scholar House is specifically for parenting students, and they provide childcare assistance, which is one of our other major issues when we're discussing those gaps to basic needs. It is housing, food, as well as childcare and mental health, right? And so to be able to have funding and support for other agencies like this in other areas, if there was a One Parent Scholar House in several other areas where they're parenting students that have income-based housing, that have childcare assistance to get daycare and early childhood development for their students, that would be absolutely amazing. As well as that case management piece that we're missing a lot of times. And I think that would be very, very important and very helpful to a lot of the populations that we're serving. So that was one of the things that I thought about. Then I also was processing what would it look like for some of our institutions that are in rural areas, are in areas where they just absolutely do not have student housing. What would it look like? Is there a possibility that they could apply for some of these grants that are available? I looked at some of the lists of the type of agencies and entities that could apply. And I'm just wondering what that would look like if we could have, some housing support specifically for our most vulnerable students, and have that support in building those residence halls to fill that need for students. And lastly, there was a lot of questions asked before, and I think it was Maggie that just said, like, gosh, we're in a rural area, there's not a lot of resources, sometimes we don't know where to start. But for me, learning about this other area that I just learned of today was the Kentucky Balance of State. So with them seeing all of these other areas and providing referrals, I would love to see if there's an opportunity for us to have some type of partnership with this area so that we could have a referral system in place for our other counties who just don't have, an arbor youth, or that don't have a family scholar house or someone like that could do the referrals, or community action agency. Like every county does not have that. So if that were an opportunity to look into, I think that it would be greatly beneficial for our students and those institutions. So that's just notes that I jotted down. If I could live my wildest dreams with housing security and take advantage of any opportunity available, I would love to explore that, and we'll be reaching back out to see how that might work.
And then I had another question to propose. I know that he went through like a lot of resources. Do you all think it could be helpful, like if, let's say, like there was like a version of those resources that were just like for college students or like attendees? Because I feel like some of the things maybe wouldn't apply to administrators, trying to help students get into resources. So I was just like wondering if you all would think that would be helpful. Like if we just like went through and was like, okay, these are like things that we can forward to administrators that are working with students that are, if that makes sense. Sorry, that was convoluted. But because that could kind of help with like the time gap as far as like immediate need, possibly. Any other thoughts? I know it's a small group, so I feel like if you all have other thoughts to share that I haven't covered or asked about, feel free to. Because I feel like I kind of like went over most of the questions so far, or we kind of touched base on all of them.
You all will have, something where we can get all those, I can't get my wording out. He had all the papers with all the different phone numbers and everything like
Mhm.
that, and, okay.
Mhm.
I'll add all of that to my resources.
So you mentioned like you have like a resource binder. Like, is that something that you created yourself, like just throughout the years, or just something that you found elsewhere? I'm just curious.
Well, honestly, my company, they, KPCA, my boss tells us all to, try and build a resource binder. And when she comes and visits us, she normally asks what new resources have we added to the binder. So most of us do have, resources put up.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
I love binders and any organizational like kit. Like I just love it. So
I've grown to do better with organization, but it didn't come natural.
Any other thoughts, questions, feedback about the training? I know it was a lot, so I feel like there, a lot of information was thrown at us, which is good. But
On the front end, that back end information is what I think was most helpful if we're putting together a toolkit, having those resources
Mhm.
and the really big pieces of when you don't have a community action council that is right there,
Mhm.
we don't have an RBE right there who oversees that. And so learning about how that process and procedure would go to the Kentucky Balance of State, that's one of my major takeaways from that.
Mhm.
Well, if you want me to go back and share my screen again for the.
I forgot I was sharing my screen this entire time. I didn't realize it. Okay, let me stop share. I have too many monitors.
So we've covered a lot of this in our getting some of our notes taken. And again, there's only just, a couple of you all on here now. And I got a couple of messages from folks that had to drop off and had some things going on. But I'm hearing again, some of the major challenges are just the area that we live in, so there's a lack of resources. And then just there's not housing available. So even if there were some resources, and so there seems like there's a lot of things on the larger systems level that would be of great assistance to our students. And I feel like one of our last conversations, it was, oh, I'm forgetting the campus. It was one of our KCTCS programs that mentioned that there was going to be some housing built or starting to be built. And so I know that a lot of this is possible. I know that it takes time, but I think that, a lot of these things, are not just our imagination's gone wild. It's definitely a start to being able to provide some solutions and movement along that spectrum of housing security. And my goal, while I did put it on from 1 to 3, my goal was still to keep it to where we could end at about 2:30. So with such a small group now, it looks like that is definitely going to happen. But before we go, I wanted to ask you all that are still with us, what are some of the other pressing things that you absolutely believe that is needed in this toolkit? What would you and your students benefit from the most? And it doesn't have to be one thing. If it's a couple of things, I would like to take the time to make note of these things because we're really, really trying to make this as most useful as possible for many people across the state. And we want to do the bulk of the work and have all of our state partners to be able to go in and use that information and then tweak it however they need to make it fit their basic needs webpage to make it fit their student case management process, however they see fit to use the information on their campus. We want to make sure it's there, but we could go all day with all the things that we have in mind or ideas that we have, but you all are on the campuses and you know what your students need like right now. So I would love to give you all a couple of minutes to just express what are the absolute immediate things you feel like you would need in this toolkit.
I think if we had a virtual version of Aisha's binder with all of our, with everything in the state, and then I could click on the county and then the resources.
That would definitely be cool.
Then you don't have to keep up with paper. But then if I have a student, like we have students that we serve that are incarcerated, if I know that they're, getting out and they're going to Henderson, I can click on Henderson and I can say, let me get you with this person. And then a never ending emergency fund, but
Yeah. So even some best practices for how to maintain and keep the emergency fund replenished, right? That's what I am hearing. I was trying to get to, I've shared it before, but I was trying to get to one of that, just the shell of what we had for the toolkit. It was shared at our last meeting. Oh, here we go. And I posted to the Impact Exchange. I know folks are still trying to figure that out. So I'm gonna just put it up here so that you could get an idea. I just want to make sure that it is what y'all need. So I'm gonna share my screen and just show it briefly. So here's just an outline of it. And then reviewing the housing security and the impact on students and the community. And then looking at the housing stability across the spectrum. And having the students to be able to do a self-assessment tool. We know a lot of times students will try to solve their own problem before they, reach out for help. So if they feel okay, they much rather go and do a self-assessment, of where they fall on that spectrum and then have some resources that are provided to meet that. I would absolutely love that. So that is something that I've noted. Also made it here, the navigating the housing market, like a lease or rent 101. That's something that we used to do with students for when they had an off-campus department for students at UK. I would partner with them and we would go over rental agreements and leases and budgeting and tips for, affordable housing and having calculators, to do that. And so I've added to this based off some recommendations that some colleagues across the state had mentioned, and one of those was the affordable housing calculator. And then accessing the financial assistance, review of what's available for on-campus resources as well as community assistance. So a lot of those programs that Curtis had mentioned that fall under rental assistance and utilities would fall right up under here. And then legal rights and protections, students learning their tenants' rights and their responsibilities, navigating resources on discrimination and eviction. So learning even about the eviction diversion program, that would be great to be able to link up under there. And then building the community support, having it as more of like the resource mapping. So campus and community resources for housing support, who's doing what across the state, who's got different things going. And I wanted to include this in here because I know that some campuses have things that are going pretty well. And we may not know about it and we want to know and we want to learn how they got to that point, right? So if it's a partnership that they have with Family Scholar House, we want to learn more about that. Or how did the one campus, get the funds to pay for, campus housing, and they're, traditionally been a commuter type campus. Like, what does that look like? So being able to put some of those resources in place for everyone would be ideal. Crisis intervention and emergency support. So looking at how to manage and intervene, who gets involved and when is really helpful. And then learning short-term versus long-term support, as well as hotlines and support services for immediate assistance, because we're working on campuses. A lot of you all wear many different hats. You fill in a lot of different spaces, and you meet with many of students. So being able to have this in one place that can also be shared with students and colleagues alike is going to be super helpful. And then planning, learning what this looks like and planning ahead for the long-term housing security, and some best practices in campus housing policies to reduce housing insecurity is going to be key to, what we see as ideal for having our students being housing secure across the state. And then additional resources, any type of programs, director of programs and organizations, any type of terms or assistance that students just need to have would be really helpful. And then like templates, worksheets, checklists, things like that. So this is just kind of what, after reviewing a ton of toolkits that people have, community resources, as well as a couple of campus universities that have some toolkits. This is just kind of something that was pulled together to fit what it was heard our needs were from across the state. So just a quick review of this before we go, and I ask if you have any questions or suggestions for this. What are your thoughts? And if you don't have any right now, I would ask, please follow up, send me an email, post it to the Impact Exchange. We really, really appreciate your thoughts. We really appreciate your suggestions and your ideas. Most of all, sharing with us what you would benefit from, what your students would benefit from the most. As I said, like, we don't want to just put together something that we just think is going to be great or looks great. We want something that is going to fulfill a need for all of our campus partners, as well as the students that you all serve. So thank you all so very much for taking out the time on your afternoon today to be with us. Please share the information with any of your colleagues that you think would find the toolkit interesting and would have some great suggestions. Please share with them the idea of it. Encourage them to get on the Impact Exchange and share out their thoughts, their ideas. We want it, okay? As I've said before, I'm talking to Olivia, I'm like, I don't care if they go in and tear it up. Like, I just want you all to share with us what would be the ideal. We want this toolkit that is going to represent our state to be considered a best practice. We want it to help with students transitioning, as well as transitions for even folks on our campus, in and out. We want for housing security to still be at the forefront of all that we do. And we want to make that an easy process, or the easiest way that we can do that, having everything together. So again, thank you all for being here with us. And this recording and all the information from this meeting, as well as that PDF, it will be posted to the Impact Exchange. Have to get the video converted. That could take a couple of days. The goal usually is for me to have it posted within a week. Okay, I'll stop recording.
And then how do we get to the Impact Exchange?